All right, thank you very much. I want to thank you folks for coming out here to kind of get the breakdown here on what Governor Holcomb talked about. I guess probably the most expletive words I could use is the governor gave a speech. And and with that speech, I thought as far as boldness and leadership, I thought it lacked both of those. He specifically talked about the opioid problem and talked about a couple of the areas that they were going to do to try to curb that. But I was truly disappointed to not hear the word mental health in any of that sentence. And as we move forward with economic development, I know my rural friends in the areas that I represent, the rest of rural Indiana, are going to be truly disappointed when he talked about infrastructure. And he left out rural Indiana by not including in the infrastructure broadband internet connection. So as we work forward through this next legislative session, we're going to share our ideas as we always do and continue to push some of the important things in Indiana that we feel are important. And he also touched on the DCS situation, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that in a little bit. I just don't, if it's just me, but I'm just not grasping that people get the seriousness of this.
Yeah.
Anytime that someone talks about the life of a child being in danger, that is serious business to me as a legislator, just as a human. And for some reason, that message that Judge Bonaventura gave the other day is just not resonating with the other side. And I can't find the term to express. It's not disappointment. It's not frustration. It's almost anger. And those folks have got to understand the seriousness of this as we move forward. And hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. But I'll hand the baton over to Senator Lanane now and let him say a few words.
Thank you, Leader. Appreciate your words, and I agree with a lot of what you have to say. I appreciated the governor. He delivered the speech in his sort of usual friendly manner, and that was fine. But in terms of what he actually said, I was struck more by what he didn't say, to be honest with you. Yes, he mentioned workforce development, and that's been an issue which we Democrats have been talking about for a long time. You can provide all the tax breaks in the world for businesses and other incentives and whatever, but you have to have skilled workers to fill those jobs. And as Democrats, we've been putting out ideas on how to do that literally for years. Every session we've talked about. So I'm glad to hear him talk about that. Now, having said that, I guess I was expecting more of a bold vision or a bold idea in terms of what do we need to do to the workforce system in the state of Indiana, because clearly what we're doing right now is just not working whatsoever. And it seems to be a sort of a scattered approach that we have to workforce development. The funds are scattered here and there. And I was hoping to really hear from the governor some bold leadership in terms of workforce development and workforce reform, reforming the system itself. I just simply didn't hear that. The governor did mention DCS briefly, ever so briefly. And I couldn't agree with you more, Leader Goodin, in terms of the importance of this issue, because, quite frankly, if we fail our children, we fail, period. And if there truly was an emergency matter that's been brought to the forefront and is now here for not just the governor but for the General Assembly to deal with, it is the question of, are we adequately protecting our children? And he devoted, I guess, a couple of paragraphs to that, but we're not getting the answers or the accountability that we need to have, I think, as the representatives of the people of the state of Indiana. And we're going to continue to talk about that. These are serious allegations that were put out there in regards to budget reductions, inadequate staffing and services, antiquated technology, a dramatic increase in the caseload, and we need to have answers before we leave this session as to what are those problems and what are the solutions. And quite frankly, we need more than just to be advised a couple of times about what's going on there. We need to be at the table. We need to be involved in this solution here. And this isn't a Democrat or Republican situation. It's where everybody should be coming together to provide solutions for how we can better serve our children.
You're correct, Senator Lanane, and I want to point out, what are those things that we can perform triage on right now with DCS? What are the problems there that Judge Bonaventura has pointed out? What are some of those that the legislature needs to work on now that we can actually do some triage on to stop that? Because I'm telling you right now, if they come out with this report in April, when the legislature is gone, and there's just the minute chance that one child's life could be in danger, then I will guarantee you this, I'm going to be calling for a special session to get back here and fix that problem, because no child's life should be in danger.
That's right. Our children, this can't wait till 2019.
It can't.
Our children deserve better, that's for sure. One other thing, Leader Goodin, that I was struck with that was not mentioned whatsoever was redistricting reform and election reforms. And that is a priority. We think that is a priority that the people of the state of Indiana are calling for. We should have an independent redistricting commission to stop gerrymandering in the state of Indiana. And that was not mentioned at all in his speech, nor were there mentions of other ways that we could bring up the voter participation in the state in the state of Indiana. We have, unfortunately, some of the worst when it comes to that. And so I was disappointed to hear that he didn't mention that. He didn't mention expansion of preschool. We've been, of course, advocating for that for years. You know the importance of preschool education for our kids. No mention of that whatsoever. He did mention the opioid situation, and that is a true emergency matter that we need to continue to work on. And I heard some ideas out there, but you know what? This all boils down to resources. And I didn't hear the governor call for a commitment for the resources that are going to be necessary to really, truly address this emergency episode in the state of Indiana.
Do we have any questions, or are you so stunned with the truth of their words that you're speaking?
Oh, what the hell, Gerald?
You're not stunned?
Or speechless?
But realistically, though, what did you expect the governor to talk about in his state address? Obviously, the issues that you gentlemen are bringing up are issues that are very important to Democrats, that has been part of your legislative agenda. Did you realistically expect them to talk about any of those things, the redistricting, reform, et cetera?
Well, I think yes. I think if you're serious about reform and you're serious about making Indiana a better place to live, work, and raise a family, I think you do talk about those things. I think you talk about anything that might be on your agenda or that's on the Hoosiers' minds and their T-shirts, as you've seen them walking through the hallways. And you know what? The fake elections that have been going on in Indiana the last decade, that system has to be changed. And I think it's very important, and he failed to mention that.
And I was a little surprised because there's been some bipartisan support for the idea of redistricting reform. It's something that we really could perhaps get done if enough pressure were brought to bear. And his leadership on that matter could be very, very important. So I was surprised by that. Another thing that not mentioned whatsoever, he should have, I think, advocated and called for us to finally, leave the list of only 5 states without a true hate crime bill on its books. There's, I think, bipartisan support for that, but there's some opposition to it as well. So I think those are issues that, I expected him to mention those and to really call for us and say once and for all, let's do these things, let's get onto the path of progress in the state of Indiana.
Mr. Leader, what did you think of the specific workforce priorities or goals that he set out in terms of like the people who have some college but no degree, the people who are in prison? Did you think those were good goals, realistic goals?
I think they're good goals, and I know Governor Holcomb likes to talk about basketball, and I say welcome to the court. The Democrats, we started that tip-off about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, so tip-off happened way before. They're late to the game, but I'm glad they at least mentioned that as we talk about it. But there needs to be more bold reforms in education. What we've got to talk about is not only do we bring those people back into the education realm, but what about how do we tackle the huge mountains of debt that people may occur when they come back into the education realm? We all know, all the research points out, that the largest rung on the socioeconomic ladder is a good education. That's the easiest way to climb out of the socioeconomic troubles or benefits that you may be in. So that is important. Education has to be the answer to all of this, and I don't think the plan was quite bold enough.
Yeah, I think the goals are fine. You can't argue with those goals, but I didn't hear the pathway to get there. I didn't hear the clear plan on how we actually accomplish each one of those goals. In my opinion, it really should have called for a bold vision in terms of how we're going to reform the workforce development system in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, and as we move forward, a very, very good point. There was no real pathway how to get there, and I think maybe Ricky told Lucy this once, Governor, you got some splaining to do, and we want to know what that pathway is as we move forward. So.
Terry, you said you failed to address mental health. You talked about the 9 additional drug treatment centers. Are you referencing mental health as separate from substance abuse, or are you saying it's not going far enough on substance?
You know, I think the foundation and all the once again all the research points out that the opioid addiction, a huge problem there is the lack of mental health facilities. And I know the governor talked about more facilities for maybe treating those folks in the drug realm with another drug, and as we talk about that. But when we talk about mental health, we're talking about the entire picture of mental health, and it's not just for the individual that may be addicted to the opioids. It's also mental health help for their families. Do people learn how to cope with this and try to help their family members dig out?
Yeah, and I would say this, Eric, to that issue. This matter of the opioid crisis, those goals of increasing the number of treatment centers is fine. We'll definitely need that. But, you've got $2 billion in the bank. I say we're being penny wise and pound foolish there, because we need so many resources to address this issue. And I wish the governor would have come out and said, we need a plan, and leave it up to Mr. McClellan and others' expertise to say what that plan would be. But I can tell you the resources are far more than what we're talking about devoting in this speech here.
On DCS, the governor promised these progress reports to you and the public, at least 2 of them before the end of session. Could that go to trying to address, the triage that you talked about and maybe legislative action before the end of this session?
I hope so, and I hope it truly does. But so a progress report. Even as a teacher in the classroom, we would give a progress report, and each teacher, to them, that was something different. And to every parent that got a progress report, it meant something different. So I hope this progress report is very thorough in its explanation of what's going on, and I hope it addresses the real issues. Really, I think the starting point for all this is the issues that Judge Bonaventura needs to point out. So, okay, here are the problems. Now, this is where we've got to start, and those haven't even been explained yet, even what those are. So I think I don't even know where the starting point is, and I don't think they do either. And that's where we really got to get to, is where is the starting point, and let's get started.
Yeah, I think it's going to take more than just a couple of reports to the General Assembly. I think it's going to have to be concrete plans on identification of what the issues are, what are the solutions, what are the resources that are needed. We can take a look. I was glad he mentioned the caseworkers, because they have a tremendously important and hard job that they have to do. But we need to look at it. How are we compensating our caseworkers? What's the turnover with our caseworkers? What's the case? How much work are we putting on them? Is it just something that's beyond really reasonable expectations? So, and those are things that I think we can't afford to leave this session without knowing the answers to those questions.